Hi, my name is Chris McFall from UnitedFilmroom.com. Today I'm going to be talking to you about creating liquid metal logos inside of Adobe After Effects. The first thing you're going to need to do is to make sure you've got your logo fully prepared in a vector drawing package such as Adobe Illustrator. This is my logo. All I've done is I've made sure that all the text is converted to curves, and then that all the shapes are united, combined into one single shape using the Unite and other modes of the Pathfinder palette. Yeah, just go through and make sure you've got one single shape. The next thing we're going to want to do is set ourselves up in After Effects. So we're going to create a new composition. We're going to call it Logo. I'm going to make sure it's 1920 by 1080, 25 frames per second, and a duration of 10 seconds. Okay, then let's just go in and change the depth to 32 bits per channel float. Okay, and then I'm going to go to the composition settings, and for later on, this might come in useful, is we're just going to go to the advanced section, and in the renderer options, change the shadow map to 4000 and click OK. Cool. Neither of those will affect anything immediately, but later on they should prevent a few bumps in the road, as it were. The next thing we're going to want to do is, in our logo composition, we're going to create a new solid. That solid we're also going to call Logo. And again, with all our solids and all our compositions, let's just make sure, just say it now rather than me repeating myself over and over. Make sure your width and height is 1920 by 1080, always 25 frames per second, and a duration of 10 seconds. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is go back into Adobe Illustrator, select all, Control-C to copy, go back into After Effects, select your logo layer, Control-V to paste. As you can see now, it's pasted our vector illustration as a series of masks. As you can also see, some of those masks have needlessly inverted, making everything look a little bit wrong. I know from experience it's mask 5 through to 18 on this particular logo which are causing the problems. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to change their blending mode to add. And that will create the effect we're looking for and just rectify all the inverted knockouts. You're going to probably have to experiment a little bit yourself if you have a similar problem. But once you've got that done, let's press on. Okay. The next thing we're going to want to do is create another new composition. Actually, bear with me 1 second. We're going to want to create one more composition by dragging the logo layer into the comp logo here. And we're going to rename this, and we're going to call it incoming_metal. There we go. Before we actually continue, it's probably a good idea now to load in some textures which we're going to use throughout this project. You're going to need 3 specific textures. Now I'm going to just drag those in, as I've prepared them earlier in my, my project folder. This is the brushed metal texture, this is our concrete texture, and this is a HDR map of a sunrise. Now I got these from the brush metal texture I got from texturefreaks.com, the concrete from Lost and Taken, and the HDR map from hdrmaps.com/freebies. Also, I did find some other really interesting ones in hdrlabs.com, so really worth checking those out. Now we've got our textures downloaded, we should probably prepare the brush metal texture so that it's more suitable for our use. What we're going to do is just drag it into a new composition which we'll rename Mercury_Right_On. Then we're going to go to Composition Settings. We're going to change it to 1920 by 1080 and make sure it's 25 frames per second and 10 second duration. Then we're going to quickly add a motion tile effect. And then we're going to scale out the width and height and the mirror, and then tick the mirror edges box, which is great. Now we have a seamless 1920 by 1080 brushed metal texture. Let's move on. What I want to do is create a new object, and it'll be a null object, and we're going to rename that trace null. Oop. There we go. Now our trace null is just a little empty sort of placeholder object, which we are going to use to show After Effects where we want our logo to start building. So we're going to actually draw a path where it starts and where it ends. To do that, we're going to use Motion Sketch, which is this palette over here. I'm going to set the capture speed down to 16, and show wireframe and show background should be ticked. If you've got a graphics tablet, that might make this job a little bit easier. Just click Start Capture, and then start drawing around the logo. So I'm starting where I want the liquid metal to flow in, and then I'm just going to draw a line going around my logo inside where I want the logo to start building. Now I'm going to actually do this in this particular logo. I'm going to do in 2 parts. So that's where mine ends. Later on I'm going to duplicate all of this and then just do it over the other side. But I'll spare you having to sit through me basically duplicating my work, and just show you this side for now. Oops, misclicked there. So great, now if we press space, you'll see that the null zips around our logo, which is exactly what we want. Unfortunately, it ends a little prematurely. So with trace null selected, press U and it will show all our keyframe parameters, in this case on our position parameter. And then I'm going to click the graph editor key over here, and then I'm going to just drag and select all my keyframes and then scale it across to 7 seconds. That way we've got a couple of seconds for the liquid metal to settle. So great, now we've got the corrected motion path keyframes. Okay, step 2. In this step we're going to set up the liquid mercury beads. We're going to create a new solid, call it Mercury Incoming. And I must stress at this point, we're about to add an effect called Mr. Mercury. And it's a great little effect, but the results are going to be pretty unique to your own situation. And every time I've tried this, I've always had to tweak it a little bit from the settings I've put together. So as with all the techniques I show you in this project, tweak the parameters to suit your needs. Don't blindly follow what I'm putting down, because in every likelihood it won't work out for you the way it should in that regard. But you know, by all means, use what I'm showing you as a guideline. The other thing we want to do is make sure the logo is turned off now. We no longer need to see that. So Mercury incoming. Let's set the X radius to 1. The Y radius to 12 for no particular reason. The velocity, which we're going to be keyframing later, we're going to take to 0.8. The birth rate we're going to take down to 0.6. We're going to take longevity to 2, it's already at 2, that's good. The gravity to 0. The resistance we're going to take to minus 0.15, that might cause problems for us later, but let's see. Extra we're going to put to 2, and twirly for animation, 35 for influence, blob in and out, no, blob out sharp, there we go, that's what we want. Birth size of 0.13 and depth size of 0.36. There we go, we've got some pretty cool stuff going on there. What we need to be quite careful of at this point is that these beads, particularly when we add camera moves in later, but these beads aren't really obviously appearing from nowhere, because whilst I've gone to great lengths to make these settings to make the beads appear off canvas as much as possible, there are always one or two which just come out of nowhere. They just appear on the canvas and run into the project, and that can really ruin the illusion. So just be quite careful and, you know, play with these a little bit if you are getting a problem later on. That said, this also doesn't look a lot like liquid metal, so why don't we add some turbulent noise? This effect, if we turn this off, you can see it just creates these sort of cloudy patterns, and we're going to create something quite chunky. We're going to put turbulent basic, and we're going to put it to linear, and then we're going to put the contrast to about 250, 248 maybe, brightness to 21, complexity to 1. And that gives us a fairly sort of a quick chrome effect. Cool. The next thing we're going to want to do is take the playhead right to the start. We're going to get our trace null and we're going to Control-C to copy it. Then we're going to go into our project, we're going to take the incoming metal and I think the logo as well, and we're going to drag these into, actually we're just going to drag one of them, let's just drag the logo into a new comp, and we're going to rename the comp which is created, and we're going to call it, that's a good idea, it's a good question, what are we going to call it? All Metal. That sounds like a good name to me, All Metal, because that's where we're going to keep all of our metal effects. So we've got the logo already in there, then we're going to drag in incoming metal underneath it, and what we're going to do is with the playhead right here at the start, we're just going to press Control-V, and now we have an instance of our trace null, which is exactly what we want. And if I press U, you'll see that the keyframes are in exactly the same place they are in the incoming metal layer. Now we're in the incoming metal comp, now we're in the incoming metal comp. If we right-click the trace null in the incoming metal comp and go to time reverse layer, we now have, if we play this, the actual path that the null runs backwards on here, which is great. I've just realised I totally missed the most important step for this effect, and that is we really want, whilst this effect it looks great static, we really want this emitter, or the producer as it's called in the Mr. Mercury effect. We want this producer to be following our null around, so it looks like where later on we'll be building the logo out of liquid metal behind the null. We want these points to be flooding into that area. So the way in which we're going to do that is to, if you just drag the trace null above Mercury incoming, just for convenience's sake, we're going to just whirl down the menu for Mr. Mercury, and we're going to alt-click the stopwatch next to the producer parameter. And then we're going to take this pick whip icon, and we're going to drag it over to the position parameter and release. And what that does is it creates this little line of code or an expression that links our producer parameter to the position parameter. And now, with this layer reversed and all, I'm just going to take the resolution down slightly. You can see it's following our null around, which is exactly what we want. So if we go into the all metal layer now, and we were to take the incoming metal, and then we go to time reverse layer for that, I'm just also I'm gonna hide the logo for now. We'll have this comp is now playing backwards, and inside that is the trace null path layer, which is also running backwards within it, which means that from our point of view, that will be playing the right way round. The only difference is the metal will now be running from out, instead of from in to out, it'll be running from out to in and being sucked into our null point or null position. I think you'll agree that's looking pretty successful. So that's great. That's exactly what we want. Okay. The next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to keyframe a couple of parameters. The parameters I'm looking at are the velocity and the birth rate. So in the incoming metal comp, just towards the end, probably 9 seconds, 8 seconds if you're feeling fancy, just click the stopwatch for the velocity and birth rate parameters. Then what we're going to do is just go back down to about 2 seconds, and we're just going to just take them both down to 0. And we can stagger them a little bit, why not? In fact, we'll want velocity to be running after the birth rate has stopped, I think. And hopefully what that should do, if we just play it, is everything will start to slow down towards the end and then stop. Perfect. So yeah, that's all looking pretty good. So in this step, we're going to set up the all-metal comp. Inside the all-metal composition, we're going to just drag in our Mercury_Write_On composition, and we're going to just drop it underneath the logo. We're going to set the track matte to alpha. Now you can see we have a perfect knockout of our texture. Again, what we're going to want to do is to add an instance of Mr. Mercury onto the Mercury_Write_On layer. And again, what we're going to need to do is connect this. We're going to drag the trace null above the logo layer so that we can access it easier, I should say. And we're going to spin down our menus, our effects, to Mr. Mercury. And again, we're just going to alt-click the stopwatch by the producer, get the pick whip, drag it up to the position parameter on the trace null and release. And now that's linked to that. Fantastic. As you can see, we're getting the Mercury effect, but it's knocked out by this the track matte of our logo, which is exactly what we want, but it's not quite working how we want it just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the velocity to minus 0.2. We're going to set the birth rate to 1.5. We're going to set the longevity to 35. I've got 35.8 for some reason. I'm not quite sure why it's so specific, but it's just a really long longevity. And our gravity to 0. Resistance 0.22. And we're going to leave the extra as it is. We're going to go to animation style jet. And I think constant blobs should do. Our birth size to 0.09. Our depth size to 1.98. Look at that. There we go. And now our logo is being built in this sort of Mercury shiny weird effect. Obviously these aren't matching up just yet. And to be honest, there's no real need for us to match them at this stage. But I suppose we could add some just so it's a little more pleasant to look at. Let's have a quick go at that. Very quickly, there's I quite often like to use CC glass on this. It gives a nice sort of texturing, but I find it really slows the program down a lot. So I'm going to leave that off for a minute. I might add it in later. But yeah, we'll keep on the Mercury_Write_On layer. In fact, we'll double click it to go into the comp, and let's add some curves. Let's get some contrast on our and then let's get some saturation, hue and saturation effect, and just take all the saturation out. So as you can see, that was going a little bit bluey, which wasn't quite what we want. We'll click the padlock on our effect so that when we move to view in a different comp, we don't lose that. And now we can sort of looking at the the container comp, we can adjust our settings. So yeah, we're just pulling up the contrast to make it match this a little bit more. If you really wanted, you can add turbulent noise, but to be honest, it doesn't work quite so well in this instance of Mr. Mercury. And we're going to want to actually drag that onto the Mercury_Write_On layer here. Just wind that down. and put it above it. It does work, as you can see, but it's not quite the same. So I'll give it exactly the same settings. Well, that said, it's not all bad. But if I turn it off and on, maybe take the opacity down a little bit. I don't know, that's not too bad actually. I mean, I can certainly live with it. As I said, these effects right now, whilst they affect the 2D look of, obviously they greatly affect the look of this piece in the two-dimensional sort of compositions. Once we add a 3D dimension to it, it's going to become much less visible. So it's not, you know, it's not the be-all and end-all. I just want to try something a second. I'm gonna. There we go. That's quite interesting. If we take the longevity down, then the warping effect done by the Mr. Mercury effect, so that whole sort of this bending of the texture, that will actually dry, if you like, to a straight finish if you take the longevity down a little bit. I'm actually going to leave it somewhere between, I'm going to take it back up to 20, so not quite the 38 or whatever it was, so it dries a little bit more. I say dry, I don't know why I'm saying dry, it feels like it's almost like it's setting, but yeah. We can always take that up again later if we need to. And then the I'm wandering off focus a little bit. That's the wonderful thing about these techniques is you can play with them all day and really tweak it to get what you want, but it can be a bit of a time suck. The other thing we're gonna want to do before we get on to the next step is to add a vector blur. And I use the vector blur because I don't particularly want a really feathery sort of finish to this, and I think if we add it directly to the logo, then that's probably the best way to affect it. Basically, and also, yeah, leave it about the 5-second mark, and we should have from that it should give us enough of the logo to preview. I'm just going to start playing with this and just cranking it up a little bit. As you can see, it's got quite a hard edged blur. It sort of deforms the shape, makes it sink, but it doesn't make it all. It does feather it somewhat, but it doesn't make it feathery like the fast blur would. Minus 15. That looks pretty good. Maybe minus 20. Right, so I'm just going to keyframe the minus 20, and I'm going to just drag that to, say, around there, and then I'm going to put it to 0 at the 5-second mark. And let's just, I'm going to again take the resolution down. Let's just see how that works. And what we should be getting is that it should just be defining itself as the animation goes on. So it starts where it's really undefined what the shape is. These valleys are a little bit sort of shallow, if you know, and then they widen out. So that's exactly what we want. Maybe a little bit of yeah, take ridge smoothness down to 0. I'm really tripping over my tongue today. I do apologise. I think I'm probably trying to talk a little bit too fast, even for me. So again, with this, just set it how you feel it should. So I've just done minus 20, ridge smoothness of 0, and map softness of 25, and that seems to be about right. It looks fairly good to me right now. So and again, actually, do you know what? You can always take these parameters and just sort of go into the graph editor and, you know, give it a bit of ease. Obviously, you can do that without going into the graph editor, but yeah. I feel like it should be going that way actually. There we go. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Okay, anyway, as I said, massive time suck if you keep playing with these effects all day. Let's just save that there, and let's move on to the next step. Essentially what we're going to do in this step is add some layer styles to create a faux 3D effect, and then we're going to actually set up the main composition in which we're going to create later we're going to create a real 3D effect. The faux 3D sort of stuff is not 100% necessarily to the final technique, but I think it adds a lot more definition and creates a really nice finish. It's entirely up to you, and also into how you're, what you're trying to achieve with this project, what your logo looks like, or your text. So whether or not you want to add the layer effects is it's a matter of personal taste. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. We're going to drag an instance of the all metal comp to create another composition. We're going to rename this composition 3D underscore comp. Inside this, we're going to add some layer styles, drop shadow, and bevel and emboss. Let's hide the drop shadow for a second. Oh, and also let's drag in the background layer, the concrete layer, behind our all metal comp. In the bevel and emboss settings, we're going to change the depth, the technique, to chisel soft. We're going to keep the depth at 100, direction up. Size I'm going to take to about, actually, before we carry on, let's move the playhead to around 0.8 or something like that, where it's got some good completion. Let's take the resolution up, and now we can sort of see a nice, what our effects are doing. We're going to take the size up to about 65, maybe, and as you can see, the effect here is we just want to make sure that the size comes up so it doesn't plateau early, so it looks pretty good. So where was it? 65? Yeah, that works. Also, you'll notice this odd ridging. So we're going to go to soften and just add 4 on soften, and that will just take away any of that hard ridging which we don't want. We're going to turn the global light on, which means we can control the light effect for the drop shadow and bevel and emboss from a single point, which is up here. And then we're just going to add a little bit of colour, a little bit of warmth to our highlights, and a little bit of dark blue to our shadows, just to keep it lively looking. Also, I'm going to drop that down to about 50% so our shadows don't get too inky too early. We're going to turn our drop shadow back on, and we're going to again go to global light on, and we're going to, I don't know, should we just play with the effect a little, see what we want, what we're going to get out of it. This isn't going to be the main shadow. This is just going to be like a little accentuating shadow. So it doesn't need to be particularly strong. It's just there to add a little more depth to our piece. Again, we don't want it to be too hard. So I'm just subtly tweaking these, and that seems okay to me. We're going to go into the blending options. We're going to change the, actually let's turn this down to a quarter so that we can just spin these around nice and quickly. I want my lights to be over here to the left of the composition, so technically stage right, but so over here to the left, and I want it to look quite low, so that's what I'm going to set up to about there. Now bear in mind, if you later on in the 3D section where we create some comp lights, if you animate your comp lights, you're going to have to animate the you're going to want to animate the global light in the 3D comp as well, because otherwise it's going to look like you've got highlights from a different set of lighting. It'll look very weird. My lights are all static, so or my lights are going to be static, so I'm not too worried about that. If you really wanted to, you could hammer together some code to link the global light angle and altitude to the position of the comp lights in a different composition. I did try to put something together for this tutorial, but it wasn't robust enough and was causing more problems than it was solving, so I decided to leave it out for this instance. So yeah, just some suggestions if you wanted to take this a little bit further. Great, what else do we need? Well, in our 3D comp we're going to need... well, I don't think we're going to need anything else in there necessarily, but what we can do is take our 3D comp, drag it down and pre-comp it to create our main comp. And unnecessarily capitalization. What we're going to want in the main comp is this is where we're actually going to set up the 3D effect. So we're going to need our HDRI map and what else? I guess we're going to need to create our displacement map. So I'm going to drag the all metal down again and create another comp. Rename this displacement underscore map. And we're going to drag that. We're going to drag that into our main comp as well, and we're going to also turn that one off. Now, the displacement map is a really important layer. Essentially, it's our entire effect is driven by it. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the alpha channel of this, the fact that it's cut out, to tell After Effects where the background begins and the liquid metal, where the background ends and the liquid metal begins, which allows us to do all sorts of things, including displacement and reflection maps. So we've got to get this section right. Yeah, so in the past I've used the set channel effect to create an outline, and I've just done this. But what I've noticed with this effect is you actually get a slight dark outline around your shape, which is, potentially could be causing some trouble later, and will explain some of the difficulties I've had setting this up in the past. So what I'm going to do is propose an alternate way of doing this, leaving the all metal brain failing me, leaving the all metal comp there with no effects on. I'm just going to get I'm going to create a new solid and I'm going to call it alpha. And then I'm going to drag alpha below all metal and I'm going to set the track matte to alpha. Now that turns this off and we get a pure black outline, which is exactly what we want. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a layer style, and the layer style is going to be called, and actually this is probably where I'm going to need to pre-comp it, which is, or am I? Let's see, bevel and emboss. No, looks like it's working. Let's delete the bevel and emboss. We're going to add a layer style, and this is a clever bit called Inner Glow. Now, Inner Glow uses exactly the same algorithm as the bevel and emboss that we were using earlier. So if we go towards the end of our thing where we can see our logo taking shape, and we change it to precise, leave the source as edge, and then we're going to obviously put the colour down to white. What we can do is we can just dial the size of this up, and you'll see a very familiar pattern emerging. So we're going from white to black, but we're getting all the same ridges as we were getting in the bevel and emboss layer style that we applied earlier. So maybe 65 was it that we used? Anyway, what we want to do is just play with this effect until we get something resembling a white to black transition. And just keep dialing stuff around. And hopefully, let's just do that. Hopefully we can get something really smooth. Okay, now that's looking good to me. So What else can we do? Let's set an adjustment layer. And I've got a sneaky feeling we're going to need fast blur on about 4. But we'll come back to that. Let's turn that off for now, actually, and let's come back to that in a little while. The last thing we're going to want to do in this step is, in our main comp, we're going to make sure we've added a camera, 36mm film plane, 50mm focal length seems fine, and a new light, which we'll call key light. Make sure it's a spot, add a little bit of colour in there. Intensity of about 250 is a really good starting point, cone angle 70, inverse square clamped fall off, 100% darkness, cast shadows, shadow diffusion to about 150 pixels. Really good starting point. We'll probably tweak those a little bit later. Now you'll notice these don't do a great deal to affect anything right now, but once we turn on a 3D effect or a 3D layer, then that will kick in. Actually, whilst we're here, we might as well add an ambient light, which we'll call ambient because we're original like that. We'll take it down to about 50%, and again we're going to want some colouring to that, maybe a little stronger than the key light colouring. And then maybe if we just Control D duplicate the key light, and we'll rename this kicker. Not really the correct terminology for what this light's going to do, but that's okay, I don't mind. And we'll make it slightly pink, say, again we'll make that about 100, cone angle 90. I'm pulling figures mostly out of my backside, but these will give us some starting points. So that's all our lights and cameras ready to go. So when we do go 3D in the next step, you're going to see some cool stuff. So step 5, setting up the 3D in the main composition. We need to make our logo 3D. We need to actually to extract depth data and displace the image, as well as creating a reflection map for this area to show that this is shiny metal and this is not shiny concrete. So to do that, we're actually going to use a third-party plugin called Freeform Pro. Now, this is a fantastic bit of kit, but it does run a little expensive for most tastes. So I want to show you a couple of alternatives, which, whilst they can emulate some of the functionality of Freeform, they can't do it all. And if you want the best results, then there is only one road to go down, and that is Freeform Pro. Now, I got into this effect a few years ago because Freeform used to be packaged along with After Effects back in CS5 and 5.5. And it was, it's a fantastic piece of kit. If you've got the CS5 plugin, then you can affect all the displacements which I'm about to show you. However, Metal Freeform Pro has come a long way since the CS5 days, and you can now add reflection maps, and there's a huge amount that you can do with Freeform Pro that you couldn't with Freeform. But the main point of interest, particularly for this project, is the ability to add reflection maps and the refinement options which are given. So you could use CS5's built-in Freeform plugin, but it will limit some of your options. If you don't have that and you still want to create some 3D displacement, then you can use the built-in effect displacement map. However, what you can achieve with this effect is severely limited compared to Freeform. For instance, we won't get any real shadows. Let me show you what you can expect using if you use this effect. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change the displacement map layer to displacement map, unsurprisingly, and we're going to add change the horizontal displacement to luminance, and exactly the same for the vertical displacement. Then we're going to set a value of 50 in each of these displacement values, and then we're going to use a clever bit of code I found on creativecow.com. Unfortunately, I don't still have the original link, otherwise I would point you to it and those responsible for writing it. I did some minor tweaking to get it to work for my own purposes. But here's the code. There we go. So try, open curly brackets, and I'm not going to read all of this, but essentially what this does is it will take the 3D camera in our comp, it'll take the position of that relative to our displacement layer, or our displacing layer, and it will adjust the values accordingly. So yeah, it's literally it's copy that code out into your effect, and then obviously you've got to turn on the 3D layer, turn the lights off because they won't be affecting it the way we want them to, in any useful way anyway. And then we're going to have to do a couple of quick changes to the displacement map. We're actually going to have to add in an invert, and then we're going to have to add a white solid behind it, and that's going to give us a nice clean displacement map with no alpha, which is what we want for this for using with a displacement map anyway. So if I take the unified camera tool now and rotate, you can see we get some displacement. What's actually happening is I've got the vertical one, the code is slightly wrong there, but you can see it's in fact, let's go and fix that, because it's looking kind of funny. Now I'm not quite sure which part of this I need to tweak, but let's give that a shot. No. There we go. That will, well, it's again, that's still not perfect, but you can get a shallow displacement which allows for a basic 3D effect. If I turn on the key light, let's actually, we're going to be moving this key light a little later anyway, so you can see it doesn't cast shadows. It doesn't allow you to have any realistic lighting effects, unfortunately, which is where the layer styles from earlier come in quite handy. So there you go. That's the built-in displacement effect. Let's go onwards and let's see what we can actually achieve with Freeform Pro. So I'm just going to go back to step 5 before I added the displacement effect. And what we're going to want to do is go into the displacement map, and we're going to add that invert that we spoke about earlier anyway, because yeah, it should have been in there from the start. So main comp, go to our 3D comp layer, and we're going to add Metal Freeform Pro. As you can see, suddenly, without even turning the 3D layer icon on, because we don't need that, our layer is being affected by the camera and by the lights. What we're going to do is go create a quick camera move before we do anything else. So we're going to go to the camera somewhere in the middle, 5 seconds say, and we're going to just add keyframes to all the transforms. And then we can just go to the start of our comp, and using the you can use the unified camera tool with the left mouse button allowing you to orbit, the right allows you to push and track in, and then the middle mouse button allows you to pan around a little bit. So we're going to go for somewhere around here. That looks pretty good to me. And we're just going to keep tracking in. And that looks pretty good. And that's automatically created the keyframe for that. And as you can see, now our camera will zoom out to here. And then we'll go right to the end, and we'll just hunt around for a good camera angle. We're going to try and keep as much of the background, where the background falls off, out of shot as possible. I mean, it's not a deal breaker, but it's not, it's not a handsome look necessarily. You can get away with it if you're careful with the depth map later on. But anyway, so there we go. We've got a camera move. May I recommend that you go in your own time and go into the graph editor and with the position selected, separate the values and just smooth the move so that it's not, I've already started, so I'll finish this, but you just don't want any of these moves to just come out of nowhere. You want it all to be quite fluid so that there's no jarring stops or starts or, well, anything really. So just dragging out the Bezier handles until you've got a nice smooth camera move. And then we'll turn off the graph editor again. Cool. You'll notice there's no displacement currently, and our lights aren't doing a great deal of anything. So what we're going to do is go into Metal Freeform Pro and start to set things up. We're going to go into the displacement mapping, and we're going to set the layer to displacement map, unsurprisingly. We're going to leave the layers, to use layers RGB Luma, so that means that it's going to be based on the light and dark of our layer, and we're going to put the displacement height to around 30. As you can see, it's instantly displaced, and it's looking pretty good. I mean, it's a bit jaggy, but we'll worry about that later. Set the quality to full just so we can see what's going on. As you can see, it's all wibbly wobbly, and we need to fix that. The easiest way to fix that is go into tessellation and change subdivision to 1000. Turn max iterations up to about 10 and cross your fingers. With tolerance, I'm not quite sure what's what, but I've set it to 0.1. Experiment, see what works for you. The next thing we're going to want to do is actually, well, as you can see, it's still quite jaggy. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to lock our view up here so that we can go into our displacement map and start playing around. As I mentioned the fast blur earlier, now would be a great time to turn that on. And yeah, 1 or 2 points seems to be 1 or 2 pixels of blur. It seems to be enough just to smooth out those edges. But we want to have a look at the beads earlier on and see how that sort of looks, because that's quite important that is nice and rounded. Okay, it's difficult to tell because we've got too much lighting going on, which we need to address shortly. But we've got specular catch lights here where there's a slight curve, but I don't think it's anything major to worry about. So we're getting this nice sort of displacement. To be honest, I'm thinking this angle needs to be a little bit more, yeah, a little bit more like that. And we can see here some of the jaggedness is still there. So we'll just take it up to a 3. Turn on repeat edge pixels just in case. Up to 2. Yeah, I'm gonna err on the side of caution and just leave it at 3 for now. It doesn't look too bad, and once this is all moving, we won't notice any of this slight jaggedness. At least I'm hoping we won't. Otherwise, I'm in trouble. Moving forwards, we need to change the reflection mapping, and we're going to change reflection mapping to HDR maps, and you can instantly see we've got this really strong reflection effect, which is also showing me that the curve isn't quite as soft as I'd like it. So maybe there's something we can do about that later. Unfortunately, our reflection is currently not just on our metal, but it's all over our background as well. So in order to change that, we're going to go into the displacement mapping, displacement map channels, use for reflection, and click alpha. And suddenly we've got 2 really, really separate pieces of, it's two separate parts of the image, shall we say. Now the reflection's a little bit strong. I say a little bit strong, it's a lot strong. We're going to go into material properties and we're going to take the reflectivity down to say 60. Let's see what that does. We're going to just pull these settings around, see what they do. Just get rid of some of the hot spots. And I think, sadly, I am going off the that HDR map. It's very strong, isn't it? Cool. Oh, actually, there's a point. That's probably one of the reasons it's not looking 100%. Let's go back into reflection mapping, and let's change the from spherical to equirectangular. And that should give us something a little less obvious looking. See, that's a lot better. That's a lot nicer. I mean, it's still not perfect, but I could live with that, I think. From here, I think the best thing we could do is probably start playing with the lights. So let's go to the halfway mark. And let's take the key light. And let's take the position. And let's just drag that value over. If we just drag the values rather than doing it in the viewport, then it keeps our point of interest where it should be. We're just going to keep dragging it over until this cone reaches the edge, and then I'm going to drag it down slightly. So we're really raking along the surface and getting quite dramatic lighting. Okay, so that's our key light looking good. Let's add the ambient light for now, and that really lifts the rest of the background a little bit. I'm not going to change that for a second. And then let's add our kicker. As you can see, that just adds another dimension to our lighting setup. We're going to drag the position over again, just following this. Sorry, just following the key light. And all we're doing is just making our setup as interesting as possible. And let's take the intensity down to 80, maybe, and ambient. So something I've noticed is the shadows aren't really casting from this, so maybe we need to tweak this some more. Cool, okay, well that's looking a lot better. I think we're going to have to take the intensity up even further. And then we can turn on our other lights. Let's have a look at the end of our composition. So we've got most of what we need set up. And let's just take our ambient down here. And maybe, yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Again, play as much as you can with your different settings. And just get a look that you're happy with. Oh, there's another idea actually. Whilst we're here, we could probably look at changing the blending mode of the reflections. So reflections, equirectangular. If we change this to hard light, let's see what that does. So that's not bad. That's a little bit better again. I think it's still a little bit more colourful than I was planning, but I think I quite like it. So anyway, let's just save that there. Okay, so now is a really good time for me to go back and build the other half of my logo. I'm going to have to fast forward through this bit so I don't bore you out of your minds, but just so you know exactly what I'm doing, I'm going to be creating a duplicate of the incoming metal comp with a separate trace null path, and I'm going to be copying the trace null into here and creating some copies of these layers and attaching them to that trace null. If that doesn't make sense, watch this back in slow motion or just click through, but I'm sure you'll get the gist of it. Okay, so there we are. We've finished off our logo, and it's all looking pretty good. Let's just check this in high res. I think I'm going to take that as a sign to just go ahead and finish up the technique. There's not a great deal more to it than that. Obviously, you can finesse this however, as I keep repeating, you can finesse this however you like. Actually, I'm just going to move this camera slightly at the very end. It's there we go, slightly nicer composition. And let's just save that. Okay, so here we are, our final step. And all we're going to do is we're going to turn our lights off, and with our camera, leave a camera on, and then we're going to go into the Freeform Pro controls. And what we're going to do is we are going to take the render quality and go to render mode and change from full render to depth. What this is going to allow us to do is going to create a grayscale map which shows how far away any part, any plane is. Allow me to demonstrate shortly. Just going to pull up the contrast. There we go. We can you can see some of the detail in there now. I'm just going to turn that off for a second. If we go to the 5-second point and beginning, you can see there's not a lot of detail at all throughout. Now, so my aim is to get as much sort of detail, but without keyframing. Because if you keyframe it, you'll notice later on that the focus doesn't work very well, and it all goes a bit all over the shop, which is a technical term. So this seems to be as good as it's going to get. but we are still getting quite heavy banding. But I don't suppose that can be helped at this point. Cool. Okay, well, I'm going to assume that's the best it's going to get. And then I'm just going to add to render queue. And we're going to call this depth map. Leave it as an AVI, that's fine. And I'm just going to hit render. And I'm going to come back a little bit later. Okay, so I'm back in the final comp. If you haven't already, then you'll want to delete the brightness and contrast effect that you added on here and change the display mode straight back to full render. From there, go to your project, import the file that you just rendered, the depth map, and then drag that into our main comp. Then, with 3D_comp selected, get the lens camera blur effect and drop it in after Freeform Pro. You could also use Frischluft's Lens Care, which is a really, really nice product, but I'm going to show you camera lens blur simply because that's built in and therefore more chance of it being available to more of you. On the blur map layer, just select the depth map as you'd expect, and then bump the blur radius up to somewhere about 80, just so we can get a really nice strong effect. And then what we're going to do is throughout the video we're just going to set focal points. So I want to focus here, so I'm just going to slide the blur focal distance until I get there. Then I'm going to go back a second or two. Actually, I'll go back to 5 seconds and I'll set the focus on that, and then right back to the start. Let's set the focus on that. Okay, and let's make sure the edge pixel's selected, and then let's go half a second increments and just make sure that we're always focused on something cool. Obviously don't jump around too much, it'll be a bit distracting and weird. So yeah, it'll take a few seconds, or well, take a few minutes just to go through making sure that everything is nicely focused. And once you've keyframed the focus, that is it. That's the technique in its entirety. All you need to do now is add any effects you like to use as garnish, such as Video Copilot's optical flares, Real Smart Motion Blur, or Pixel Motion Blur, which is the built-in equivalent, and obviously any curves or color grading that you want to throw at it to give it a bit more punch, and then render. I recommend rendering as a TIFF sequence just in case there's a crash, in which case you can pick up from the same place again. Stick it together, add some audio, and hey presto, that's your first Liquid Metal logo sequence created entirely in After Effects. So that's all from me. I'm Chris McFall of UnitedFilm.com. I hope to see you with more tutorials in the very, very near future. And until then, take care.